chapter, for those of you who don't know. And I'm John Widener, president of the organization. We were talking about this today at our board meeting, and I'm thinking we should teach people on how to network. It's not like you all don't know how to talk to each other, but I've been thinking more and more about how to build your practice, be it internally, externally. How can you supplement everything that you do with all the excellence that you can meet in an organization like this? I don't know what I do without my network, because I can work with a company and bring in any kind of expert I want, from investment bankers to lawyers to accountants to trainers to whatever. And that's the way I built my network, so that I can service my client. Internally, it was the same thing. Who can I use internally, externally, to bring in to further my capabilities as a professional? It's not about me coming to a corporate person and pitching. That makes no sense. That's kind of rude in a setting like this, but who should you know to make what you do better? I couldn't get this done without the board. By the way, some of these folks are rotating off come the end of our fiscal year, which is June, and we're looking for some good folks to come join. So, anybody? Please come talk to me. Again, sponsors. It takes a bit of money to run an operation like ours, so we're really grateful for them. And if any of you are interested in sponsoring, those of you who are vendors, we'd love to take your money. But seriously, we'd like to partner with you. It's really not always about the money, and we do have partnerships with some of these groups. Power membership, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's joint membership locally and with the national organization, and there are advantages to being a member to both. I think, again, in the room tonight, you see a lot of professionals, and I think that, in that context, just joining this group alone, the local, is great. The national has a lot of other services that you can draw upon in terms of information, contacts around the country. Quite useful. We have our own YouTube channel. Certainly encourage you to check that out. We're streaming live tonight, live on the internet. And over time, we want to be using this to maybe do our own webinars, so that we don't always have to be meeting face-to-face. We were just talking about streaming an upcoming program that two of our board members are putting together on how to use virtual reality. And I'm proud to say a lot of our chapter members are going to be presenting there. Steve Gardner, who some of you know, Michael Leckie, who's from GE, but I've co-opted him as a member even though he doesn't come. Rich Montanaro, who a lot of you know, who was a former member of our board, is going to be presenting. Anna. We have, I should actually let Anna talk a little bit about this, but I'll do it because we're going to run out of time. We have a couple of folks coming from the LEGO group who are going to be talking about change and transformation. LEGO, I didn't know this until we were doing this, actually was selected by Fast Looking forward to hearing more about. Normally I'd have our membership people do this, but are there any new members here tonight?
Yes.
Would you like to share who you are and what you do for 2 seconds with your mouth full?
Thank you. I didn't expect that. Hi, everyone. I'm Ellen Waterbach with Blessing White. Some of you may or may not know that name. I'm learning that kind of comes in and out of the network. So anyway, I'm in Stamford, Connecticut, and I'm an account manager with business development. So if you don't know, we focus on engagement, career development, leadership development, and coaching and executive leadership now. So kind of a lot of help businesses thrive, and as we like to say, have great days at work. So anyway, nice to be here and join this chapter, and thank you for having me, and happy to meet all of you as I get to more events.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Sandra, you want to talk a little bit about the resource table and social media
sites?
Good
evening, everybody. We do have a table back here, so if you're interested in learning a little bit more about being a Power member, I suggest you take a look over here, and also you can see some other materials that might be of interest to you. And I also want to welcome all of you here to be a part of our social media community. So what that means is that we have a LinkedIn group. We'd love you to join our LinkedIn group. We are active on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And what we are going to do, we were so happy to have David here speaking to us. So we will be, as you saw before the meeting, we were posting about David, and we will be doing so after the meeting. We'll have photos, some video. Jim is putting up the YouTube. I'll be putting up a smaller version of that on LinkedIn. So we would love it as a show of our appreciation for David if you all would comment and like, and that's what we'd like to do for our thanking our speakers. So.
He is an author. He's with Global Edge, and he's going to talk and help us relative to strategic thinking for you and your clients. So we will send our e-blast out soon, as that is hot off the press, that news. And Anna.
And thank you. Learning Community of Practice, we initially thought we would do it on April 17th, but I now see we'll have like 3 events in a row, April 16th and then April 19th. So most likely we'll try to reschedule our Learning COP for a different week, make it a little more flexible. And our speaker will be Hugh with the latest and greatest about VR, technology, learning, and also XAPI. He will help us decode what that is, if you don't know. And we'll also look at these new technologies from a perspective of how to introduce it with a minimal impact from a change perspective on human side of things in our organizations. So please stay in touch with us, and we'll let you know the date once we confirm it. And this Learning COP, Learning Community of Practice, will be held in New Haven, not New Haven, Orange, at the University of New Haven in the morning. So we'll let you know when.
And I don't want to go too far out into the future, but we had a very interesting idea that came across emails, and we talked a little bit at the board, of doing something of a highlight reel come June of all the folks who are going to be presenting up at the New England Area Conference, for those of you who aren't able to attend. Just a highlight reel of all the topics that this brilliant group of presenters, except me, are going to be showing. So I do think that we're really trying to make programming exciting for our members. One more thing before I turn this over to Anna to introduce our speaker for tonight. Please fill out your evaluation forms. It's very important to us to make sure that we're getting good programming tonight, and so that you can embarrass David. And with that, Anna.
Thank you, John. Hello, everybody, again. I first heard David speak at ATD in New York City last year, and it was really impressed me, and just it was very clear how he explained different technologies that are in the space, whether learning and development related or just technologies in general. If I say that the number of new technologies as they emerge and the range of those technologies is overwhelming to many, who would agree with that? If I say that the speed they come up at or emerge at is just unbelievable, very hard to even comprehend, who would agree with that? So yes, this topic is like really timely for all of us, and I'm really looking forward to learn from David on what is a hype, what is not a hype, to really kind of demystify it and take the mystery out of do we have to do all of these technologies, and to help us make those kind of decisions. David is Executive Vice President and Executive Director at the eLearning Guild, and I would really like David to say a few words about himself after our very warm welcome, because David is coming from Long Island, so triple warm welcome.
Wow. Hi, everybody. See if I can get this. Are we on? Oh, we're very much on. Okay. How's everybody doing? Thank you so much for inviting me to come and chat with you today and have a conversation with you on technology. As Anna mentioned, I am with the eLearning Guild. I have been with the eLearning Guild for about 5 years. I've been in L&D for enough that my children comment on the color of my hair way too often. I've been in this industry for about 20, 25 years, depending on when you say that it starts to count. Like many people in this room, probably I started in this field accidentally. I was in banking for a long time. I was really, really good at my job. So somebody said, you're really, really good at your job, go show other people how to do it. And discovered I fell in love with training and have never looked back since. And after about 15 years in banking, I went to a nonprofit and fell in love with the job there and the mission of what we did there. And then midway through that, someone at the Guild called me and said, we'd like you to come over and do some work with us. And I said, thanks, but no. And they called me back. And I said, thanks, but no. And persistence counts, because eventually they kept calling, and I said, all right, well, let me make a jump. And I'm completely happy that I did. I love the work that we do with the Guild. If you're not familiar with the eLearning Guild, we are a professional development community, very much like ATD in many ways. But our focus, while ATD covers everything within talent development, we focus narrowly on learning and technology-based learning and training and education. That is our niche. And all the stuff that you see from ATD in terms of magazines and articles and conferences and online events, we do the same sort of stuff, just narrow within our vertical. So that's a little bit about me. Now, why are we here together? Why was I invited to chat with you today? To talk about what's going on with technology, to talk about how things are emerging and how things are changing. Before we dive into some of the different technologies, first thing I want to point out is a URL that's on the screen here, very, very low. I'll probably bring it up higher towards the end of the presentation. Anything I mentioned today, if you could take one thing away, if you're someone who likes to take notes or anything during the presentation, that's all you need. What that URL will do is take you to a page on my website that has my slides. It has every resource that I mentioned during our time together, as well as a number of additional resources that you might want to explore. If any of the topics that we discover you want to take a deeper dive into, that URL will take you there. I'll show it up again at the end for those of you that may not have gotten it. It is case sensitive when you're using it, by the way. So when I speak at an event, one of the things that, if you've ever spoken at an event like this, you know one of the things that's critical is your title slide. The one that opens it for you. It sets the tone. And for me, it was really important. I said, well, all right, what should my title slide image be? Because that's critical. And I thought, well, we're going to be talking about technology and how it's changing and what we're really looking at and how things are changing. And the cliche of the fortune teller came to mind. I thought, well, a little bit too cliche, and we are going to be talking about technologies in that. So maybe I should represent that in the slide and go into something that is a little bit more technology-based. Go something that represents the technologies that we're going to be talking about. And I thought, well, what is the core element of what we would be discussing here today? We are looking at the technologies that we use, and we're looking at the world around us and how technology is changing the way we interact with each other and with content. and making predictions on how those technologies are going to change the way we interact with one another in the future. And the more I started getting towards that core value proposition that we're going to be predicting the future and how we're going to be using these technologies, I thought, well, if I'm going to be fully transparent, I should go with a blindfolded monkey throwing darts. Because the reality is, anybody who says this is what the future will bring is not telling you the truth. It's all guesswork. And it's all contextual. That's one of the things that's really challenging in this discussion. When I talk to you today, I'm not going to tell you anything. One of the two words that you probably will not hear me say are right and wrong. Because I can't tell you what's right or wrong for you and your organization. What works well with a technology for one organization is going to be completely inappropriate for another organization based on the context. What I'm here to help you do is understand the changes that are going on in the world around us so that then you can put those changes into the context of your own organization so you can make educated decisions around whether or not you and your organization should be exploring some of these changes. And to put context around what's going on in the world around us and what it means for L&D. That's the core of what we will be looking at today, and I do encourage this to be a discussion. If you have questions at any point, we'll probably have some time at the end for a formal Q&A, but I prefer the anarchy version of Q&A, where if you have a question during the session, just grab my attention and join the conversation. So words are very important to me. I think the ancient philosopher George Carlin once said that words are critical because we think in language. And the quality of our thoughts and ideas can only be as good as the quality of our language. And that applies to just about every context. And I think of the words we use very often in the L&D field. And even in the point of a session like this, where I'm going to be coming in and talking to you about stuff. Words are very important to me. For instance, the title of tonight's session, is it the now and next of learning and technology? Or is it the now and next of learning technology? A or B? How many think A? How many think B? It's A. But whether you thought A or B is less important to me as to why there's a huge difference between these two. Because there is, in my mind. And it's something we need to understand when we think about the work that we do in our industry. We use the phrasing at the bottom very often, learning technology. We link the two of those together as a thing within our industry, that we use learning technologies. And I don't hate the word or hate the phrase. I just think it's entirely inaccurate based on the way we use it. When you go to an average conference, and I host these conferences or anything like that, and you go around the expo to see the learning technologies that are available, you're not seeing learning technologies. What you're seeing are educational technologies. You're seeing training technologies. That's not a criticism of them. It's just an acknowledgement of what they are. Because we have to think about what the language means. And when you think about, the best example I can think of the difference between all of these two different phrases. I've met many of you for the first time tonight, and yet I guarantee we've all shared the same experience. You're at dinner like you are tonight, out with your friends, out with your family, you're talking to one another, you're having a wonderful time, the conversation is flowing. And all of a sudden someone poses a question that gives the table pause, and everyone goes, I don't know. Within a second and a half, what is somebody at that table inevitably going to do? Pull out their phone and say, I'm going to Google it. That's a good idea, let me check it out. Nobody in the history of mankind at any dinner table around the country, around the world, has ever said at that moment, that's a really good question. I'm going to log into the LMS and find the answer. And that's not a criticism of the LMS. The LMS has its place and definitely serves its value. It's representative of how the world is changing. How the fact that we walk around with these smartphones in our pockets that can get us any answer that we want at any given point, how it's changing the way that we exist in a digital world. And everything that we talk about in today's conversation about technology and all the things that are changing has to be viewed through that context. And I can think of nobody who represents that context more than this guy. This is my son, and if you've ever seen me speak at any of the eLearning Guild events or anything, you will understand that I am contractually obligated to mention my children in every presentation that I ever do. I think so. But this is my son. This is Christmas morning, and he's playing with a toy that's a little BB-8. If you're familiar with Star Wars, it's a little droid from the Star Wars movies, and it's a remote-controlled droid that you use with a smartphone. It's his favorite toy that he got on Christmas morning. And if we're being completely honest, he got it Christmas morning because I wanted to play with it. So he's playing with this thing, And again, in order to control it, you have to download an app to your smartphone. Now, I have to preface this with a little bit of understanding about the Kelly household. There's me, who is digital, shiny. If it's new and digital and shiny, I need to play with it. And then there's my wife, who's the opposite end of the spectrum, who's kind of like put down the device, shut off the TV, go out and play. And we balance each other out very, very well. So he has this app, he has this toy, he has this app. And he's playing with it on his phone, and he says, "Dad, I have a problem." And I immediately go into panic mode going, "Oh no, you broke your mom's phone." But he didn't break his mom's phone. I said, "So what's the matter?" He goes, "I want to watch the YouTube video on how to play with this." And I said, "All right, so the YouTube's app's on the phone, go do it." He goes, "No, I want to use your phone. So I don't have to turn the app off. I want to use your phone for YouTube and mom's phone first." And I have this image of my mind of my wife coming down the stairs, who doesn't like him on a smartphone in the first place, seeing him with two phones in his hands. And I'm thinking, that's not going to work. That's no. There'll be change locks involved if we go down that way. I said, so here's the thing. And now you keep in mind, my son's 9. And what I'm about to describe to you, what I said to him, this was a hardship to him. I said, look, I'm sorry, you can't have your mom's phone. You can't have my phone and your mom's phone. You're going to have to turn off the app to use the toy, open up the YouTube app, watch the video, close YouTube, and then go back to the other thing to play with the toy. And he was like outraged. He's like, oh, I can't use both at the same time. It's ridiculous. I'm like, okay, you're going to have to deal with this. And I walk away. I go back and I continue making breakfast. And then I hear the video playing on how he's going to use this, but it's playing way too loud. It's like way too loud for a smartphone. So I go in the room, and there's my son, who followed the letter of the law of what I said, still on the app, still using the phone, looking at the TV where he found out how to turn YouTube on, watching the video. And this isn't about digital natives or any sort of generational stereotype you want to throw at it. It's not anything like that. What really, the reason I share that story is at that moment I looked down at the box, and there, still perfectly sealed in plastic, was the instruction booklet that someone spent an entirely too long amount of time creating that he could not be interested in at all. And the way we function in a digital society now, he had essentially the resources to teach himself how to use this toy. Someone had created a course in paper format on how he can do that. He wasn't interested in that. He wasn't interested in being taught how to learn how to use the toy. He wanted to solve the problem. And in that moment, he used digital technology to solve his problem. He wasn't interested in being taught how to use this. He just wanted to solve his problem. And that's the environment that we're in today in the digital world. That nobody is, we use the jargon in our industry of self-directed learning. Nobody is walking around that doesn't work in L&D identifying themselves as a self-directed learner. Nobody's walking around saying, you know what, I feel like I'm going to be a self-directed learner today. No, what they're doing is they're saying, I'm going to solve this problem on my own. That's what self-directed learning looks like in practice. And the digital world is enabling that for us. And it's kind of pivoting the perception of what L&D should be working on. So as I share all of that to give us context around the discussion of the technologies that we're going to be exploring tonight. Because the reality is, if you want to predict how technologies are going to change how we learn, you don't look at education. If you want to understand how technologies are going to change how we learn, you look at how technology is changing how we live. I'm in this industry. I am passionate about this industry. I love the work that we do, and I am a member of numerous communities so that I can understand the work that we do. And the reality is, if I want to understand how technology is changing the work that we do in this industry, I really don't look at this industry much. I do, but it's kind of past the timeline at that point. If I want to look at how technology is changing how we're going to be doing things in 5, 10 years down the road, I look at things like the Consumer Electronics Show. Because that's where you're going to see technologies that are changing how we live on a daily basis. Because as the expectations change around how we live with technology, the expectations will change around how we expect to learn through these technologies. And that's what we need to be thinking of, is how these technologies are changing our way of life on a daily basis, and what that means for the work that we do. Because the reality is, the discussion that we're going to have tonight, it's not about technology. It's not about learning. And it's not even about training. Thankfully you have food, so you're not going to leave anyway. But don't leave, even though I'm saying it's not about these things. What this conversation is really about is disruption. I mentioned the fact that I'm always interested in language, and disruption is a word that's always fascinated me. Because disruption is a word that has negative connotation to it. That disruption is somehow a bad thing. And the word in and of it, I mean, it's shifted a little bit now, because now it's kind of like a buzzword of, ooh, we're going to disrupt the industry and things of that sort. But the reality is disruption as a word is neither positive nor negative. It simply means a change in the status quo. What makes disruption positive or negative is not the disruption itself, but how we react to the disruption. And we have the opportunity now to react positively towards the disruptions that are coming down the pike for us. And the thing is, we've been through this before as an industry. That's one of the things people don't realize. Is we talk about all the technology changes that are going on. We've been through this many times before. Many of you have probably worked in an environment, probably still do today, of traditional training. Maybe you still doing it today, but most of us have worked in an environment where we either did this exclusively or predominantly. How many of you are still doing traditional training today? Or worked in an environment that you did? See some people, good hands coming up. This is what training was for decades in some environment, that you had to go to a training room, hear from an expert in a classroom-based environment to learn what you needed to learn and taught how to do your job. And then suddenly these computers came about. And we had this new thing called eLearning that could enable us to do something different, which is so normal now, but there was a time only about a little over a decade ago where this was a new idea. And it was extremely disruptive. Now my first question to you is, when you think about going through that disruption, as many of us did, who was eLearning disruptive to?
Us.
Us as L&D professionals?
Learners too, I think.
Learners? I break it down into three groups. You've mentioned two of them already. So it was disruptive, and let's look at the three groups that I break it down into. First off, the learners. Someone said the learners. Now, first on disclosure, this picture lies. I love the work that we do in eLearning. I think that's fabulous, and I think it can really, truly change lives. But no one in the history of mankind has ever been that happy to take eLearning. But it was really disruptive to learners. I mean, we are conditioned, even to this day to a certain extent, we are conditioned through 12 plus years of school around what learning looks like. It looks like a teacher in a classroom. And then suddenly you want me to just use a computer and read and watch videos and click a next button and engage in online experiences. It was really disruptive. What do you mean there's no teacher or the computer is going to be my teacher? It was really disruptive to learners. It was also disruptive to the training department. I work in InDesign, I work in Word, I have my facilitator guide, I have my instructor-led booklet, I have my workbooks that I do, and now you want me to build a drag and drop? What does that even mean? It was really disruptive to trainers, where suddenly this safe zone that we've known for decades, it's why a lot of trainers, even to this day to a certain extent, look at the world of e-learning as a threat instead of as another addition to our skill set. But it was really disruptive to the world of the trainer that suddenly there was a computer that could do things that only I could do before. And it was also disruptive to organizations themselves. You think about our organizations, they have workflows, they have energy, they have cultures, they have expectations. And for a lot of organizations, before e-learning came about, there was an expectation that if there was a need for someone to learn something, there was a definitive workflow. You signed up for a training workshop. You needed the manager had to schedule things so you could be out of the office for a certain amount of time. There were travel and expense reimbursements. All this stuff existed within the culture and in the energy of the organization. And now suddenly, it changed. And this is an example of where the disruption was actually viewed as a good thing. The organizational leaders like, I'm sorry, wait, so we don't have to pay for the travel? And they can do it while they're at the job? Sign us up. And I think in the early days of e-learning, we kind of leaned a little too heavily in that direction. But the reality is, it was a positive disruption for organizations. So that I share that context just to give us an example of what we mean when I say disruption, and how these technologies are going to disrupt what we do in L&D and disrupt the organizations we work in and disrupt the learners that we support. Because the reality is, if you think about e-learning as one change, and then you kind of look at the future of the technologies that are coming down in the future, buckle up. Because the changes that are coming now are coming faster, and they're bigger changes than what e-learning was. And we're going to be changing, there's going to be a lot of these technologies that are going to be coming very quickly, some of them a little longer. But it's important that we realize, putting all of this in context. When you think about, before I go into my list, I'm just curious. When you think about the technologies that are going to impact the work that you do, what technologies, what changes are coming that you think, yeah, this is something we need to keep our eye on? VR?
Adaptive.
AI? Adaptive?
Oh, the blockchain, my friend.
Blockchain, the blockchain.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, the blockchain. Other things? Sorry? Good. We're not going to talk about any of that. So we're going to talk about all of those and more. So there are a lot of changes. Now, before I jump into my list, I want to return to some of the context here. My job now is one where I am essentially a student of the field now. I am studying what we do and trying to host conversations that enable us to do it better and to push our industry in the direction it needs to go. So I am in a unique position where I get to see kind of a cross-section of what all these individuals are doing based on the stories that we host. So I am going to put these in kind of a chronological order of things that are happening closer to now to things that are further out. And that's the order in which I've kind of laid things out for tonight. However, there might be people in this room that I'm talking about something that's now, and you're like, we're not doing that. Or I might be talking about things that are, this is 5, 10 years down the road, and you might be thinking, we're doing that today. That's great. Neither one of those are right or wrong. You have to apply this to the context of your own organization and to decide whether it's right or wrong for you. So with that, I'll start with something that many of you are probably playing in the space in today, multi-device learning. How many of you are leveraging smartphones, tablets in the work that you're doing today? Most of you? Looks good. If you're not necessarily wrong, but the majority of people, there's a normalization that has gone through with what we used to call M-learning. I mean, there's enough of a normalization that M-learning in and of itself isn't really a valid term anymore, in my opinion, because it's just part of e-learning now. Mobile is just part of the infrastructure through which we do this. What is the term that is often used in the world of developing content when you're taking into account mobile devices? Responsive design. You hear that phrase a lot, responsive design, which is a good thing. Responsive design in and of itself, if you're not familiar with the term, essentially means the design that I have is going to be able to be displayed appropriately regardless of what sort of a device that I have. I'm designing it in a responsive way so that if it's on a desktop, it appears one way that's appropriate to be consumed on a desktop, but if I'm on my smartphone, it reformats in a way that it's more appropriate for consumption on that particular type of device, which in that definition works great. I would argue it's not enough. Responsive design is wonderful, but responsive design repeats mistakes that we as an industry have made many times before. Go back to e-learning when it first came about as an example. E-learning we had this classroom environment that we're in, almost similar to what we're doing now, although we never served food like this in the training rooms that I was in. And now we have this computer, which has processing power, it has screens, it can do all of these different things that a computer can do. And what did we use it for? We used it to take that PowerPoint, shove it into the computer, add a next button so that people could view it on their own. We entered the world of the computer, of the desktop, with blinders on of what training is. And we took the classroom thing and we shoehorned it into the desktop. We're doing the same thing with mobile right now. Responsive design is great, but it's essentially saying you can take that definition that I shared with you a second ago and you can phrase it differently. I want to take what I did on the desktop and make sure that people can access it appropriately on their mobile phones. That assumes that everything that if you were starting from the phone, that everything that you could do there, and only what you could do there, is what you want to do on the phone. But think about how you use your phone on a daily basis. I used my phone for probably 27 different things before 10 a.m., none of which involved a phone call. Because that's how we use our devices every single day. Now compare that to how your organization might be using the mobile device in the context of learning and development. I would venture to guess that there's a pretty sizable gap there. That gap is a gap of opportunity that we're leaving off the table. If all you're doing is a responsive design where you're taking the desktop content and making it appropriately accessible on these different devices, it's not a bad thing. But it's repeating the mistakes that we've made in the past. You think about your mobile phone, it's got a camera, it's got an accelerometer, it's got a GPS. All of these different things are powerful tools to create experiences for people. And we see them being used all the time in the apps that we're using every single day. We're just leaving that functionality off the table in the L&D programs that we're developing, for the most part. If you're doing, if actually some people go, oh, we're doing something a little different, wonderful. But there are a lot of people who are leaving that opportunity off the table. Any questions about mobile before I move on? Data and analytics. It's another big trend that's coming through our thing. And as I continue introducing new ones, you're going to start to see if we had a Venn diagram of all the different things we're talking about, they start to overlap, and by the end it'll just be one big mess. Because that's what I always strive for when I do a presentation. By the end of it, to make sure it's just one big mess. But data and analytics, when you think about the phrase data and analytics, or the data and analytics conversation in our world, what's the two-word phrase that always comes to the top? Big data. Big data. Big data. What does that mean?
Other than a lot,
Mm-hmm.
it means unstructured data.
Unstructured data.
Yeah.
And that's the key point there, unstructured data. Normally when we talk about the big data, people focus on the fact that it's big, because there's a lot of data. And what's interesting to me is it's not the size of the data that matters, it's not even the data itself to a certain extent that matters. Why this conversation is important is that computing power has advanced to the point that we can take that unstructured data and make sense of it. That we can use that data in ways we've never been able to do before. Yes, big is part of the equation, and because we are generating more and more data every single day than we have ever done before through sensors and user-generated content and all these different things, generating more data than we've ever done in history. There are lots of different versions of the statistic that's out there. I know the original thing was attributed to Google, but some version of this, the math may not exactly be right, that we will generate more content in the next 2 to 3 weeks than has been generated in the history of mankind before it. Bottom line is we're generating a lot of content these days. And that changes things. So we have these processors, these computers, that can now take that data and make sense of it in ways we've never been able to do before. That matters in many, many ways. First off, let's put it in the context of L&D. We already touched on it tonight, XAPI, where the data conversation is very often centered around in our industry. What is XAPI? I don't know from you, I know you know it. Yeah?
It's the next evolution of data transfer.
Yeah, here it is. A lot of a phrase that's often thrown around as next generation of SCORM, for those of us that use that. It is essentially giving us the opportunity to track data in ways we've never done before in our industry. Historically, SCORM has enabled us to track critical business imperatives like how many people went through that course, what test scores did they get, things that our business leaders really don't care about. XAPI is bringing us closer to being able to track meaningful data for our business and to be able to interpret data in ways that can actually help us do our jobs better. Now, how many of you are using this in your organization today? Few. Trying, which is one of the things you should realize is that this specification that exists called XAPI, a couple of things you need to realize. First off, while it tends to kind of corner the market of conversation in our industry around data and analytics because it is a very forward-moving spec within our industry, it is not the data and analytics conversation in and of itself. It is probably the most visible part of it, but it's not even the only spec that's available. It is one spec that has gotten a lot of traction in our industry, but it's representative of a larger trend around data. If you're using this or experimenting with this in your organization, great. If you're not, you still need to be paying attention to it. And the reason that I say that is because of the other side of that equation. I mentioned there were two sides. One is this is happening within our industry and you should understand it. But the reality is this is also happening in our world. And not just XAPI when I'm talking about data and analytics, because XAPI is essentially a way for you to take next generation data and analytics and use it within L&D. You can proactively do that today. There are use cases for it, and every day our industry gets more and more comfortable with using this, and there are better examples of it in play that we can learn from and replicate, and best practices and proven practices are emerging, which is great. That's if you wanted to proactively leverage it within the work that you do. But if you're not going to do that, which is fine, maybe no organization is going to, no business leader, or very few business leaders are going to come to you and say, why aren't we using XAPI in our learning programs? because it's our thing. They don't necessarily, most of the business leaders are not going to be there. However, that doesn't mean you can turn your back on the XAPI or the data and analytics conversation, because the reality is data and analytics, big data, to oversimplify it, is going to come to your organization. It may not be there today. It may not be there tomorrow. It may not be 5 years from now. But eventually, it's going to impact your organization. And if you're not going to be the one pushing it through, then you have to be prepared for the other end when the knock comes on the door from your IT department that says, we've just done a massive overhaul of our systems. We're treating data and analytics differently. We're tracking a lot of different things, and that includes your data. And the reality is, when that knock on the door comes, at the bare minimum, you want to be able to participate in that conversation. You don't want to be in a position where you're like, oh crap, let me go find out what this big data thing really is. You want to be able to at least participate in that conversation with IT so that you're prepared for it. So the data and analytics conversation, not necessarily XAPI in and of itself, but data and analytics within the world, you should be aware of what's going on, at least at a conversational value level, so that when your IT department comes, you can be a part of that conversation. Questions about data and analytics? Yeah?
Just curious what you're seeing as the most common uses that people are using today, as well as where you think this is going to go to in terms of how people will use data in the future to understand training effectiveness better.
It's a good question, and I can go a number of different directions in that. Let's talk about what I'm seeing today right now. What excites me about the XAPI conversation right now is it's shifted from what is it to how are we using it. We are, and that's exciting. As someone who hosts conferences and hosts conversation of it, we kind of drew a line in the sand last year and said, you know what, we're done with the what is it conversation. Bring us something that shows you how you're using it so people can see that. And we're starting to see the use cases. The use cases are still, for the most part, proof of concepts in many cases. There are some that are exceptions to that. But a lot of them are proof of concepts to kind of say that if we did this, this is the type of data that we would show. And that is exciting, and I think we should be watching it. If you want to go further out, and XAPI gives us the ability to do some of this, but as I mentioned, there are other specs that are doing this today. What excites me about the data thing is I'm excited about the fact that we'll be able to understand the benefits of what we're doing more than we've done in the past, which will then affect how we're going to do things in the future. But even that is still a reactive thing. We do something, we see the results, and then we can change what we do in the future. What excites me most about the data analytics is when you start getting into the area of predictive analytics, where you're dealing with analytics that can recognize certain behaviors and give you the edge of there's a problem coming, and you have the opportunity to circumvent that. An example of that actually has already gone on in the higher ed environment is when they were looking at student records, and they got, I think, 7 or 8 different universities to just share their student records. And what they did is they were able to identify a pattern of behaviors that students could do that made them a high risk for dropping out. They analyzed the student behavior and they said, if the student does these 9 things, you should flag them and get them in for a conversation because they are at risk for dropping out. And they put that in play in these universities, and they were able to affect that metric. That's when it gets powerful in my mind, is when we start being able to use these metrics and the data that's out there in order for us to make better decisions before or during a process. And depending on your organization, that's still kind of ways out. Higher ed's a little further ahead of us than corporate learning, regardless. That's an example for me. Any example that anyone wants to share from their own experience? All right. Interactive video. Any of you ever watched a video online?
Yeah.
As a speaker, every now and then you got to throw out one of those questions. It was like, it's like kind of like going to a concert. It's great to be in New York City, where everyone, just know everyone's going to cheer for that because they're all in New York City. Interactive video. Video's been around for ages. It's been around since we had the little spools that used to roll up and down up from one wheel to the other to watch a video on a thing. And it's been used in training just that long. But video has grown tremendously in terms of its ability to be used in L&D. Partly powered by broadband and the accessibility of what we can do with videos. You no longer have to hit click and watch something spin for 30 seconds before it actually starts to play a video. part of it's drawn by that, but what excites me most about video now is the fact that it's becoming more interactive than ever. And I'm not talking about the interactivity of a branching scenario, which is interactive video. I'm not saying it's not, but the ability to take a video and break it down into different branches so you can kind of do a choose your own adventure for those of you who read those books like I did when I was a kid. It goes beyond that. Interactive video now is giving you the opportunity to be a part of it in ways we've never done before, and there are blends of different technologies that do that. But one of the things that I think is most exciting to me and is going to take video to another quantum level of ability of usefulness in a learning context is how search is changing as it applies to video. Right now, if you search a video, if you wanted to search for a video of the recording of hi everyone's watching video. If you wanted to search for a recording of this session that we're doing here today, after it's been posted online, you could search for me, you could search by my name. If you happen to remember the title of it, you could search through that, you could search through the chapter name. Anything that might be in the title or potentially in the description, you could search for it and hopefully find it there. And that's what search is in the video today. But technologies are very close to becoming mainstream that enable us to not only search that sort of information, but to literally search anything that someone said in the video. That the audio will become searchable items within the video. So if you was like, hey, David said this one thing, I don't remember where I said it, you could search that, and Google, as an example, would come back and say, here's a video, and at 3 minutes and 48 seconds, that's where we found what you searched for.
That's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable, and it is going to take the ability for us to use video in a learning context to huge new levels. And keep in mind, I keep using the phrase learning context. I'm not saying training context. When I think of video, I mean, video to me is an extremely powerful tool for both learning and training. Best example I could think of is a couple of months ago that we had the toilet was making a weird noise. Didn't know what it was, but I come from a place of, if I don't have to pay for it, I'm not. So where do you think I went? YouTube. And I found I found the video and I watched it and I played for about a minute and a half where I said, this is way above my pay grade, and decided, and at the very least I verified the ability for me to need to pay someone to do it. But I watched probably 3 or 4 different videos and before I found one that was kind of in the space of what I wanted to do. As compared to if I had just searched for something that could have been said, I could have found a video like that. The ability for a video to be, I mean, how many times have you gotten a video of something you wanted to do? Even that example. It was like a 6-minute video, and I was kind of watching, I don't need this, I don't need that. I watched like 3 minutes of video before it got to the point of the thing that I kind of needed to understand, as compared to if I had searched for that thing and it came right to it. That's really, really powerful in the world of learning and solving problems in the moment. And that's coming quicker than you think.
Isn't that new online video demand device? Like I saw a few commercials where like you say a line from a movie and all of a sudden you're in the movie.
It's part of that. Okay. I don't know that there are a lot of cable boxes that can do things like that. I think Netflix can do some of that. I don't know, to be honest with you, whether that's exactly what I'm talking about, where it's searching the video file, or somebody from Netflix has the worst job in history where they have to actually type in every single word that someone did, and then it became part of a database. I don't know where the line is there. I suspect it might be the latter, but it's coming, the ability to search these things. Game-based learning. How many of you are using games in your training programs today? Good, good. What's the biggest challenge with using games for learning or training programs today?
Connecting them to reality.
Connecting to reality? Sorry.
Some game developers that turn into learning game design, you can get sidetracked into the fun things of games.
Oh, absolutely. You can get lost in the fun. Absolutely. I find that the biggest challenge our industry has with game-based learning is the fact that we call it games-based learning. No CEO wants to hear, we're going to play a game. Very few are going to hear that. It's a challenge. And then we fixed it within our industry. How did we fix it?
Call it simulation.
That would be a good thing. But we called them serious games. Because these aren't games. No, don't worry about it. These aren't games. These are
The games
serious
and the boring.
games. Yes, exactly. They're games. These aren't good games. These are boring games. But the reality is that's one of the challenges our industry has. Now, I still think it's a trend. And I still think it's something that is growing within our industry. Why? Because research is starting to emerge on the effectiveness of using games in a learning environment. And that's very powerful. Now we're starting to get research that says this is how it works within our industry. This is how, if you engage people in a gaming environment, their engagement level, the way they can practice different things, it can enhance learning. It's given us research that enables us to get over the hump of let's just play a game. Yeah.
Do you have some of that on your website?
Yeah,
Research
absolutely.
you're talking about?
Yeah, I think there's one of the research reports from Carl Kapp recently came out, is on there. But if not, I know of some others, so I can always add them. But I know there's at least one or two that are there.
Great.
The other thing that I mentioned, the jargon. You know the easiest way to get an organization on board with a game-based learning program? Don't call it a game-based learning program. Just talk about the activities that people are going to be engaged in, and just don't use the word game. They might say, well, it sounds like a game, and you could say, well, yeah, it's got game-based elements to it. But don't come out of the chute with, we're going to play a game. Because that's going to get people to turn off of you. The more you can lose our jargon and talk less about our jargon and more about what people will actually be doing and describe that, the better you're going to have getting people on board. That's games-based learning. Then there's always gamification. And the first thing I will say is that if you see one of the challenges I think our industry has is too often you see games-based learning and gamification. That's the category. And that's a mistake for me. These are two very different things. Games-based learning and gamification are two extremely different things. Are they in the same hemisphere? Sure. But they are not the same thing and should not be treated as two sides of the same coin. Games-based learning is literally that you're learning through the action of playing a game. Gamification is using gaming elements in a non-gaming environment. Those are two very different things. So for instance, how many of you are walking around with something on your wrist like a Fitbit, an Apple Watch, something like that? That is a gamification tool. That is something that when you think about the fact that you get anything that's going to manipulate your motivation, where there's leaderboards, or it's giving you opportunities to hit goals every single day. These are little things that are gaming-like elements that are affecting your ability to be motivated to do something. And there are a lot of different things a lot of different ways that that's being used. How many of you might be using gamification today? Okay, only two people. One of the things I think is very important, and this is another example of something that extends beyond just the particular category of gamification I'm talking about. A lot of times the best place to look to understand what we're doing in L&D is someplace outside of L&D. There are lots of things that other industries can teach us about things that we're doing, potentially because they're further ahead of what we are, of how we're using. Gamification is an example of that. You want to learn what's going on in a mature gamification discussion, look at what the world of marketing is doing. Marketing has been using gamification for years, for decades really, around this idea of getting people motivated to do things. And what I find fascinating, if you're interested in gamification, I encourage you to look into this. What I find fascinating around the marketing discussion is there is a very, very interesting and important discussion going on in marketing around gamification right now. And it's about a line that has emerged in the sand. And the line in the sand is the difference between using gamification techniques to motivate someone towards a behavior and using gamification techniques in a way that is manipulating someone towards a behavior. And that is a really, really important line to be aware of. You know, we see a lot, I mean, without getting political, we see a lot of that going on in some of the stuff that we're seeing in Facebook right now, where people were using data in a way that they were manipulating people towards an end goal rather than just motivating them towards something. And that is a very, very important discussion as we start to use gamification or be more interested in gamification in our industry, to make sure that that's a line we don't cross, to be aware that that line exists and to make sure that we don't cross it. And there's a lot of brain research that is going on right now within the marketing space that is trying to identify the activities that kind of set where that line is. We also have a shift towards performance support. How many of you are providing performance support in your organizations today? I see a couple of hands there. Good. What is performance support?
Anything that helps you do what you have to do right there while you're doing it.
And that's a key element, right there while you're doing it. I love performance support. For me, performance support is kind of a default level of activity. When I worked in training departments before, when I was managing training departments in banking and the nonprofit I worked for, I was talking about performance support before I knew performance support was a thing. The phrasing that I always used within the departments I worked for is, what's the least disruptive way we can solve this problem? I wasn't talking about performance support, I wasn't using that phrase, but that was always the lens through which I looked at the job that we did, because I was always being told, get in and get out. That was always the message that I got from our CEOs. Give people what they need and then get the hell out of their way, let them go back to selling. So we always looked at it through the lens of, what's the least disruptive way that we can solve this problem? That's what performance support is. And it's been around for decades. It's not a new idea. But the reason that there is this renewed interest in performance support is the intersection of evolving technologies that are enabling it in ways we've never been able to do it before, and the growing interest in organizations to support people in the work. And there's a lot of different things that connect to that reason. We are a much more mobile workforce than we've ever been before. People are doing things on their own, and we are in a fast-moving environment. I don't know about you. I used to work in an environment, there was a time, for those of you that I see some younger people in the crowd, there was a time where I could get, when I worked in banking and I started, someone would come to me and they would say, well, we've got this issue that's going on in performance in the branches. And I would say, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to go out to the branches. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to schedule time with you to sit down. And you can tell me everything that you think needs to be done. Then I'm going to spend 2 weeks out in the field, talking to the people that are in the field to discover what's really going on there. Then we're going to come back in and we're going to spend a week and a half kind of putting the notes together and developing a program. And we're going to spend 2 weeks rolling out a pilot with 2 of our branches. We're going to spend a week and a half analyzing the results of that pilot before we go out and develop a full rollout plan that we should be able to get everybody through in about 6 months. And I got away with that. Now, it's like, all right, so I know it's 3 o'clock on Friday, but we need something for Monday. And that's the environment many of us are in. We all have to do more with less. And it's not about, here's the book, make sure everyone knows everything. It's about solving the problem. Performance support suits that need. No CEO is going to come to you and say, you know, we need to be relying less on training and looking more towards performance support. What they're going to say is we need to help people when they're working. We need to help people solve the problem when they need to do it. They're not using the phrase performance support, but they're asking for you to spend more time looking at performance support solutions and training solutions. And there are lots of new options that are enabling us to play in this space more than ever before. Curation. Curation is an important tool within the skill set of an L&D professional. If you're not familiar with what curation is, think of the museum curator. What a museum curator does is they have all these different assets that are available for the museum. They've got thousands upon thousands of assets, and they're the ones that decide which ones get put on display. And by they don't create content. What they're doing is they're taking existing artifacts, putting them in a specific order to create an experience for people. And in the environment of, it's 3 o'clock on Friday, I need you to give me something on Monday, this idea that we have as learning professionals of if there's a need, therefore I must create something, needs to go away. It's a lot quicker to find the solution than to create one. And in an age where we're creating more and more content than ever before, do you really think that no one has not already cracked your leadership development problem somewhere? I mean, the reality is, I know every organization thinks that it's a special, unique snowflake. But the reality is, if everybody put if we made a Venn diagram of every single person that's in here's leadership development program, yes, everyone would have something that's probably a little bit unique, but I'd venture to guess that there would be somewhere between 40 and 80% overlap between the average person's leadership development program. Why are we creating that content? Why are we recreating it? It's much easier to find it. Curation has become, as much as it's always been around in the museums, it's become something that's become very, very, there's a renewed interest in it, and a supercharged interest in it, in the age of digital technology. If you think about what curation does in a digital age, it makes sense of information. I don't know about you, but I start my day, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed every single day, I can't believe I actually used that phrase. But I'm ready to attack the day. And I open up my computer and I open up my email and I see, you have 87 new emails since last night. And my shoulders just kind of go, okay. And then I'm like, all right, well, let me open up the internet browser, and I get sucked into that wormhole of, oh, hey, buy this, look at this, look who liked this, and what's going on LinkedIn, and what's going on here. And we're just inundated with noise. Curation is a solution to that. In our ability to just block out the noise. There's a great book called Curation Nation by Steve Rosenbaum. It's got one of my favorite quotes about curation in it. Curation replaces noise with clarity. And in an age of ever-increasing noise, even within our own organizations, it's hard to know what to pay attention to. L&D is uniquely positioned to say, hold on a second, this is important and here's why. And there's a lot of different ways that curation can be used within an L&D skill set. VR. So, virtual reality is an emerging technology. It's been around for decades, but it's becoming normalized now. That's one of the things that I think is really, really powerful about the way the VR conversation is now. Much as the technologies have advanced to the point that they can actually be used without someone getting sick. It's the normalization of these technologies that has me most excited. VR serves a very, very unique value proposition for me. A lot of people say, oh, well, VR is going to be doing this and it's going to be doing that. Anytime you have something that is extremely high risk, where the cost of failure is literally life and death, the ability to use VR becomes extremely powerful. It is a rapidly evolving technology, and it is a rapidly evolving conversation in terms of how L&D can do it. This is not a pitch. This is just an example of what I'm demonstrating here. We at the Guild actually host a conference called Realities 360. We're doing it for the second time in June of this year. Why? Because we see that this technology people are curious about it. They want to understand how these technologies work, what the opportunities are for learning. And our industry does not yet have those answers concretely yet. We host a conference to get people who are curious about it, people who are playing in the space, who have already kind of paved the way for others to share what they're learning, so that we as an industry can develop those proven practices that can harness the potential of a technology like this. And the technology is only going to get better. What's helping drive the use of VR, in my opinion? When you have a virtual reality headset that is a peripheral to a gaming console that is already in millions of homes around the country, PlayStation VR, that's huge. When you have things like Oculus Rift and HTC Vive, that the price is coming down to an accessible level and more people can experience it, that's huge. What I'm excited about in 2018 in terms of the normalization of these technologies is you're going to start to see lower cost headsets that don't require a computer. Oculus Go, as an example, which is going to be a $200 standalone headset that's supposed to come out in 2018. That's going to help normalize this technology so that we are used to seeing it, so that it's just a normalcy to using it, and therefore, again, this is all going on in the consumer market right now. You want to see how technology is going to change how we live, how we learn, look at how it's changing how we live. And that road is being paved right now in the consumer market. Yeah?
Do you see, I'm just thinking a lot of the work that I do, and probably many of us do, is around the softer skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how to give feedback, how to interview, things like this. Are they using that? Can they use that? Yes, I've seen a couple of iterations of things that are doing it. There's a lot of different technologies that are out there. One of the things that I love about my job is that I get to buy different technologies like these different things, bring them home and play with them, and actually tell my wife, I'm going upstairs to do research for a while. And I've done a lot of research in the VR space. And there are applications that even touch on that. One of the things that was about a year ago that was really interesting is I'm always looking at the different types of experiences that can be there. And there was an app that I saw online that was a dating app that you could practice how to go out on a date. And I thought, that's too cheesy to not try.
How'd your wife feel about that research?
And so, you're ahead of me here. So I put this on, and it was very superficial. I mean, and one of the things that, like, if you look at a lot of the apps that are out there in VR right now, you might be like, it's touching on things, but it's not really nailing it yet. But it's starting the process. It's getting that's kind of version. We're not even at 1.0 in some of these software things yet, but it's starting to pave the way on. So this one was basically video tutorials, where it was like a 360 video, and there was literally someone in front of you that you would interact with in some way, and it was minimally interactive. It was kind of like just a 360 video, but it still had the presence. Yeah. You were still like if I was uncomfortable in an environment of being on a date, the fact that it felt like there was a woman here in front of me talking to me and I needed to interact with different things, there was presence there. Yeah. My wife did walk in while I was doing that research, and Oculus Rift has headphones, so like you can literally block out the world. She got through it. But what the hell are you doing? Because what you can see on the screen, what I'm looking at. So she just saw a woman talking to me while I was in this VR thing, and it got bad for a few minutes there. But that was an example. One of the things that, even though the production value is not really high, that I love as an example is there's a very simple app that teaches you that is a performance support tool for people who are afraid of public speaking. Yeah. You put on the headset and suddenly you are in a theater staring out at 300 people. Yeah. And it really does replicate the feel that people have about public speaking. I love that one. So there are a lot of applications of softer skills training that are emerging that I think there's going to be lots of applications. You probably have more examples that you could share that I could ever do.
A follow-up on that though, do they videotape that? The
one that I was talking about?
Not the date, I don't want to see the date, but the presentation skills.
I don't know that.
Just curious.
I don't know that they recorded for that particular environment. It was a 360. It was a simple 360 video. Okay. So it wasn't. They weren't recording me as the person in it though. But I'm sure you have better examples than I should.
Well, actually, just a quick point is the reason you use 360 is so you can see nuance and you can see nonverbals. What David was talking about is in a rendered environment. So all you do is record your voice. You wouldn't get anything out of it. Okay. Like the stuff that you'd want would be from a real video camera. Right. Actually, of the things I'm seeing, being in meeting rooms, you're seeing a lot. Yeah. You know, because it actually, even when it's rendered, it still freaks you out. Because if it's like arachnophobia is not what we're talking about. Yeah. Fear of heights, fear of spiders, fear of whatever. If it's in your mind, it doesn't have to be rendered that well. Yeah. But if you're talking about the nuance of coaching, it does. Yeah. So it's difficult to do in a way that doesn't have full interactivity with the person. Yeah. So some of the choose your own adventures people are playing with as well. Yeah. Okay.
And there are a lot of other. One of the things I think is important to realize is not just where it works, but where it doesn't work. And that to me, like there was an app. I won't mention the name because what I'm about to say is not flattering. But there was an app where you could learn about space. There's a lot of different space apps. Actually, if you're interested in space, there's a lot of really good space apps that demonstrate how VR can help you learn. This was one that was going to be hosted by Neil deGrasse Tyson. I'm a big Neil deGrasse Tyson fan, so I was like, space, VR, Neil deGrasse Tyson is the trifecta. I am in. And when I put on the headset, I found myself in a virtual theater. And I could go around and I could choose any seat in the theater. And when I found a seat that I liked that had a nice angle, I could hit play, and then there would be this giant screen, and then there was a slide that came up on the giant screen, and then an avatar of Neil deGrasse Tyson came in, and he started walking up and down and giving you a lecture. And I thought, I'm out. Because why? I don't need, if I wanted to go to a lecture from Neil deGrasse Tyson, I'd go to a lecture from Neil deGrasse Tyson. I don't need to replicate that within VR. I know, I mentioned earlier that the words I will not use are right and wrong. I'm going to make an exception here. Someone, potentially based on percentages, someone in this room will probably create at some point in your career a VR experience that I put on the headset and I look against the wall and I see my learning objectives for that VR experience. I will find you and I will stop you and I will take the headset off and I'll go, no, you don't do that. Because these are, we have to look at these things not through how do I do a question that I always pose, and I'll say this in the context of VR, but it really applies to any technology. We need to look at these technologies through the right lens. It's not about how do I do what I do through this new technology. the wrong question. It's how does this new technology change what I do? And people are often asking me about buying decisions. How do I know when I should buy this? Simple question for me. What problem is this technology going to solve that you can't solve today? If you can't answer that question, why would you spend the money? And VR has very unique things that, I mean, there are a lot of different technologies, but VR enables us to solve problems that we've never been able to solve effectively before. I see a lot of great things going on in the medical field. I see a lot of things, there are a lot of good firefighting apps that are out there. Again, literally situations where you want people to understand how to do something that in practicality is a life and death situation. Because a lot of people, one of the things, at least in today's environment, the ability to develop the content for these things is still, the accessibility line there is hard. You know, for those of you that develop things with Articulate Storyline or Captivate, which is not a criticism of these things, you're not going to develop a cutting-edge VR application with these applications today. So there's still where the content is coming from. And it can be expensive. But when you're talking about literal life and death situations, I spoke with someone at an event, they blur, recently, where he was telling me that they've done they're using it in a railroad environment, where they're training people on how to help build the railroad. Billions of dollars being invested in this project, not the VR project, but the project of what they do in this railroad work, where when you're talking about billion-dollar projects, spending a couple of $1 million on this VR simulation to train people how to do it is a good investment. So it's not cheap in a lot of the environments. Keep in mind that there are some cheap things you can do with VR, but in terms of some of the rendered stuff that is highly engaging and highly immersive, it's not cheap today, but it is every single day it's getting more accessible.
I think that there's a whole realm of management training that VR could help if the funding or the focus comes in companies of the large percentage of your employees who are introverted and have so much more potential but just may never be drawn out of them because it's just not in their nature and they won't stretch. And VR may give them that comfort level.
Great dating app for that.
The audience environment or that other kind of comfort level to try something different because they can do it in a practice environment. And I'd love to see more of that because it's so hard to develop some of those staff, but they're half of your staff.
Yeah. I was thinking along the same lines, even if you're kind of teaching a new soft skill, you require a lot of practice to get there, and it might not happen in the day-to-day. You might not stumble across just that thing. So if you can simulate it, in this sort of way, then you could build in the practice that's needed to really solidify the skills.
Mm-hmm. Definitely can. The one thing I would come back to is what I had mentioned earlier around, is that something that you can do today, and is VR going to enable you to do it in a way that you can't do it today? If so, then by all means. Mm-hmm. But is the fact that you're doing it in VR going to be different, make it any better or worse than the way you were addressing that without VR? Yeah.
Just a quick point to that. When you start to pull VR together with, we talked about XAPI, so now you can track gestures and movement and where your eyes are going in a way that you can't do any other way. Relatedly though, there are an increasing number of AI APIs, AI services you can use to talk about the ums, the ahs, the sense of nervousness that can also help with that. So I think that one of the things that VR does that nothing else does is the entire experience goes through a computer. Mm-hmm. So it's all digital, which means you can track pretty much anything you want and you can apply analyses that are hard to do elsewhere. Mm-hmm.
And reality is it's moving fast enough that the context in which we're talking about VR today, if I came back here and I talked to you about VR again next year, I would need to update it substantially because it's moving that fast. Mm-hmm. So you can't talk about VR without talking about AR. These are two things that again kind of get lumped together to a fault. AR, where VR is literally blocking out the environment that you're in to put you someplace different, AR is augmenting your existing environment. It's giving you digital assets within the current environment. And Google Glass was the AR thing that a lot of people saw when it first came out. It's been around a couple of years. It kind of went away for a little bit. It's actually back in enterprise editions. But I mean, the biggest problem with AR or with Google Glass was not, she looks so happy. She looks so happy to be wearing that. What you don't see around her are the other people who are looking at her like she's a moron. Because she's got she's got a computer strapped to the side of her head. I mean, you would have to be a complete fool to walk around with something like that in public. I was one of those fools. I had one of these, and I will say, it worked. It was really, really cool. For what it was supposed to do, which was to be able to give you contextual information without you literally staring at a phone like this. It was supposed to give you a little bit more presence where I could be engaging in a conversation with you and something would pop up and I would just kind of look up at it, but I would still be engaged with you. It worked really well as a technology. Where it failed was in the normalcy, that you were walking around with this computer on your head. It wasn't distracting to you as a user, it was distracting to everyone around you. And it's emerged as something that in many ways people call it a joke now. And the reality is, in my opinion, Google Glass was one of the most successful technology implementations ever. And I say that for two reasons. One, it makes me feel a lot better about the $1,500 I spent to beta test their product. But the reality is, the other thing is, they were pretty transparent about it. As someone who had one of these, as was one of the, as they called them, Google Glass Explorers, it was a test. It was, let's see what this thing does. It was an experiment. And as an experiment, it worked really, really well. Because they learned what the use case was, they learned how society would respond to it, and they learned where the true value of it is. Google Glass Enterprise Edition is now being used in a lot of organizations in the context of performance support, in the context of learning. It's back, and it is used in these organizations very, very well. But the reality is, when you talk about AR, as much as Google Glass got a lot of attention for it, that's not what's taking AR further ahead. What's taking AR further ahead is not the headset that Google Glass was, or any sort of a headset that Snapchat goggles or whatever they are going to be. It's the fact that AR is now in your smartphone. Both Apple and Google have now made AR a priority, where they have software embedded into the phones that enable AR to a ridiculously different degree than ever was before. How many of you have played Pokemon Go? Admit it, you've played Pokemon Go. I will freely admit, I still have it on my phone and occasionally do pull it out. But that is the most superficial example of AR in my mind. You had this icon that wasn't tailored anywhere. It was just there, but it was physical. You saw it in the real world. And it was cute, but there was a normalization to the fact that I'm looking at the world through this phone and I'm seeing a digital asset on it. And now when you've got things like Apple's AR Kit or AR Core from Google that are really driving these towards powerful applications, something as simple as there's an app that I have on my iPhone called Measure Kit, which just uses augmented reality, because now the technology is different. Now it's not just overlaying something on your screen. It is analyzing what's in front of you so that it knows where the floor is, and it's anchoring things to the floor. It's able to see and understand your environment in ways. It's getting close to the point, I think Google actually does this now, where it can actually recognize the walls as well. I don't have a Google phone, I only have an Apple phone.
That's the AR Kit does.
Yeah, the AR Kit does as well. So that's, when it does things like that, it changes the way that you use it. And Measure Kit, it can fairly accurately, you just kind of click along different edges of things, and it tells you how tall these things are, or how long a particular thing is. I can measure the length of this table all around just by pointing my phone around. It makes it really, really powerful. It is a support tool. And when you see augmented reality in the context, this is going to normalize it. I actually don't think that the smartphones is the future of augmented reality. I think it's an important step in the normalization of what AR is, so that people aren't weirded out by AR. That it's some weird thing where you're looking at digital assets on the real world. It's an important normalization process, but the true potential of AR is not in your smartphone. And the reason I say that is, and this is one thing that Google Glass did that was ahead of this, is this works really, really great, but the bottom line is, when I'm using it, I've got my phone in my hand. And the ability for us to have AR when your hands are free and they can do something, that's where AR becomes powerful. That's where the headsets get really, really powerful. I mean, even as archaic by today's standards as Google Glass was, one of the really cool experiments that I did when I had it was, I freely admit that I am not a car person. I barely understand how to pump my own gas without damaging my car. But I kind of figured, well, if that's where my skill set is, let's test something out. So I have a friend who's really, really good at cars. He's a guy, he's a mechanic, and he likes to tweak with his cars. And I said, you know what? You're going to teach me how to change my own oil. He lives in Memphis. I live in New York. But what we did, we used a Google Hangout with Google Glass. So instead, the way that if you've ever used Zoom or Google Hangouts or any sort of voice, thank you, video conferencing, I would have been here for at least 40 minutes, stalled on that one. Video conferencing software, it's two talking heads looking at each other. In my screen up here, I saw my friend the same way I would as if it's on a desktop. But he didn't see me, he saw what I was looking at. So he was coaching me on how to change my oil. I'd reach into the engine and be like, yeah, that's your brake fluid, step away from the car. And we only did it for about 5 minutes before we realized this is going to go bad. But it was such a meaningful 5 minutes to realize that he's coaching me. He's coaching me on how to complete a task in real time via this technology. So the fact that this is going to normalize what AR is, but it's not really going to reach its potential until we're using glasses or some sort of a headset that is enabling us to do it in a different way. This is not an endorsement of the product. I just think that their marketing video really nails it for us. And the link is going to be on that page for it. There's a marketing video from a company called DACRI, who does AR headsets. And their video is very much tailored to workplace applications of AR. And if you watch that video, you'd be like, I get it. I get where the potential is and why having your hands free is so powerful with it. There are other companies as well. Again, it wasn't necessarily an endorsement of DACRI, but I just love the marketing video they have attached to that. And that kind of blurs towards AR, towards wearable technology. Wearable technology tends to be focused on two areas, your head and your wrist right now. But it's advancing very rapidly to other aspects of what wearable technologies do. First off, the AR that is in your glasses, Google Glass, the failure that people associate with Google Glass was not a failure of functionality. It was a failure of social. It was a failure of normalcy and how people can come around. Right. The reality is, HP, I believe, has a new headset that's out there that looks like normal glasses. The glasses that many of you are walking around with right now, all of the components are shrunk into it, and it looks like a normal pair of glasses that just has an AR component that you would never really realize that they're AR glasses unless you saw the Minority Report looking thing on the glass. That's going to change it. Even something as simple as, I have an Apple Watch. We think about wearable technology in a too narrow of a focus. Even something as simple as the Apple Watch, like right now it's off. But if I do this, I can tell you it's 7:40. Because my watch recognizes this motion that I'm physically doing with my arm and recognizes that you've brought this watch up to your face. Chances are you want to look at what time it is. I'm going to turn myself on now. And when I put it down, it goes back off. Simple, somewhat meaningless thing, but it is the start of the ability for wearable technology to measure what we're doing physically. If you want to see an advanced form of that, look at the sports world. I'm a big baseball fan. I'm a Mets fan, which means I'm a very much disgruntled baseball fan. But there is a sleeve that pitchers wear nowadays, where they wear a sleeve. It's hooked up to it's all full of sensors. It's hooked up to a computer, and they tell the pitcher throw 20 pitches, and every single pitch, every single motion is being analyzed. And at the end of it, they look at a report that says your release point is 0.75 angle, 0.75 degrees angle off. You need to release the ball a second and not a second and a half. You throw it on the ground. 0.42 seconds of late. You're doing these things, and it's literally analyzing the exact motion that is there. That you can essentially tell someone whether or not they're doing their job right, wrong, or how they could be doing it better. That technology is going to start being normalized as well, where we can realistically understand how people are performing at work through wearable technology in ways that we've never been able to do before. Then we've got this idea of the Internet of Things. How many of you heard of the Internet of Things? What is it?
It's the interconnectivity of everything, right?
The interconnectivity of everything, which is a very simplified way of describing it. And that's everything has a Wi-Fi signal and can connect to the internet. And this is here already in many ways. but it is rapid. The web of what the Internet of Things is getting more complex every single day. It is from the most superficial to the most complex. I have a friend, to give you a fairly simple example. I have a friend who has a much nicer car than I do, and he got a call from the dealership saying, we want to set up your service call. He said, I didn't call you guys, I'm fine, I don't need anything. No, your car, let us know, it needs service. It did a self-diagnostic, let the dealership know, just contact your customer, he needs service, and the company called. That's pretty useful, that's pretty cool. My car that's out there, it doesn't have that feature. But that's a pretty cool thing. Then you've got less, I mean, even something as superficial as simpler things. How many of you heard of the Amazon Dash button? If you're not familiar with it, it is literally a little button that you can buy from Amazon that is for one product that you can put anywhere in your house. It's Wi-Fi enabled. You press the button and it makes an order for an Amazon. And obviously I saw that and I was like, well, I need that. I have to try that. So I got one of those little buttons for laundry detergent and went right there on the laundry thing. Kind of thought, let's put it in, here's my job aid. We're out of laundry detergent? No, we're not. We got laundry detergent coming in 2 days, courtesy Amazon Prime. So I put it there. And within somewhere about 4 hours, I'm upstairs, Kelly household, laundry in the basement, main floor, kitchen, dining room, things of that sort. Dave's office is upstairs, so there's 2 floors. And as if she was in the same room, what the hell did you put on my washing machine? I'm like, oh no, it's really, really cool. It's an Amazon Dash button. And if we're out of laundry detergent, you just press the button and it'll come from Amazon Prime, best price you can get, and it'll be here in 2 days. Get it off my washing machine. So you don't have to use it. Just leave it there and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, it's stupid. I can't believe you do these things. I hate these things, blah, blah, blah. I go to the store. I do it when I shop, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. So occasionally I'd be doing laundry and I would see it and I would hit the button. And 2 days later, I got the laundry detergent. She's like, yeah, shut up. So this happened for like 6 months. And then one day, mail comes, box from Amazon, I open it up. My wife's like, what? I'm like, laundry detergent. It's like, you get laundry detergent all the time. I was like, yeah, but I didn't order laundry detergent. And my wife looked at me with love in her eyes and said, shut up. Because she had hit the damn button. Now, the most superficial example of the Internet of Things that I share every time I talk about this, because I just love this story, plants in the house. I'm a plant killer, I fully admit it. I have those little things that you stick in the dirt that have the little dial that tells you whether or not you need to water it or not. They have those now that are digital. And they have them now so that when your plant is running dry and needs to be watered, it will tweet you. Which I think is fabulous, because my first thought when I heard that is, so I've got to set up a Twitter account for every plant in my house? That seems really excessive, and yet somehow I want one. I lost the battle on that one. I didn't get that one for that one. But the Internet of Things is going to start connecting all of these different things together. So we are very close to an environment where, because everything is connected, my Apple Watch, it's a very simple, the functionality is very simple. But right now, most of the stuff that I look at on my watch is stuff that's being pushed from my smartphone to my watch, little messages that is there. It's essentially a notification device, for lack of a better term. But this not only can accept the broadcast, but it can broadcast out. And from the point that I clasp this and I put in my code, it knows that it's me until I take it off. So it essentially can be broadcasting a verified signal of, this is David Kelly. So I'm working and I've got this device on my wrist that is broadcasting a verified signal that is David Kelly. I walk up to a piece of equipment that is now accepting this signal, recognizes that David Kelly has walked up to it. It's connected to our HRS system or LMS system or our LRS, whatever it happens to be, goes to that database and says, what's the competency level that David Kelly has with this piece of equipment? It recognizes that, sends the data back to this piece of equipment that I'm about to use, which this equipment now responds with an appropriate level of support based on my skill set, because it's all connected. That's not science fiction. That's stuff that we have the technology today to cobble that together. And that's coming faster than you think. So, with all of that in mind, how is this shaping up the work that we do? We are looking at learning and performance ecosystems differently. It's not just about training anymore. It's about looking at someone at the center of their looking at an individual in your organization, placing them in the center of the room and saying, what's the complete environment in which they exist? How are they being supported? What do we have influence in as L&D? What do we not have influence in that impacts our ability to be successful in L&D? It's a different approach to strategy that we're seeing grow in our industry. There's also this idea of learning personalization. The intersection of all of these technologies is giving us the ability to personalize learning experiences in ways we've never been able to do before. There are suites of technologies that do this today, but they are advancing every single day. The ability for us to tailor solutions in a more personalized manner is growing rapidly. Then we've got this conversation around digital learning, which is a conversation that I'm personally passionate about because it's not about training, it's not about education, it's about it's not the activities that we do as trainers, it's about the activities that the learners are engaged in, and recognizing how they are learning in a digital environment just on their own in day-to-day activity, and what that means to the work that we do in L&D, because that's shaping much of the future of our work. So what do we do with this environment that I've described of all these changes that are coming on? How do we get prepared for, we barely survived e-learning, and now I've said, all right, so here are these other 87 forces that are coming down the pike that we need to deal with. What can we do to be prepared? And there are things that we can do prepared. The first thing you're doing already, which is just a plug-in. The mere fact that you're here at a chapter meeting means you're ahead of the curve of what most people in our industry are doing. Because you want to network with people, you want to learn from each other, you want to learn what we're doing from each other so that you can do your job better. You want to plug into the communities and the environments through which you can absorb this information. Now I will say that what you're doing here is great. You should go beyond this. And I don't mean going to a larger conference in the L&D space. Look beyond the L&D space. Look at some of the other areas that are peripheral to our industry. Go down the hall and speak to your marketing department and find out how they learn and where their professional development areas are. That can be really powerful for you. But you don't want to just plug in. You want to listen to the conversations that are taking place. You want to understand what's being said and take it in so that you can kind of absorb what's going on. But you don't want to be a wallflower. You want to step away from the wall. You want to get involved in the discussions. You want to be a participant in the discussion. Because it's only by participating in discussions like this and joining the conversation that you can get to the more important thing, which is the context. The ability for you to take everything that's going on in the world and understand how this person's doing it and then this person's doing it, ask a couple of questions, because that's going to help you understand, what does this mean to my world? And the last piece of advice I always give people in this space is don't be intimidated by this. Look at it as a playground. Look at these technologies that are out there and approach them with a sense of play. I admit that this is a problem, but I have somewhere in, I would estimate, 300 apps on my phone. I said I have a problem. I get it. And that's not an exaggeration. I have things. But the reality is, why do I have 300 apps on my phone? Is because when someone says, oh, I had this really, really cool app and it does blah, 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 I download it. I mean, you know, usually they're free and I can try it out. And I might play with it for 5 minutes. I might play with it for a few hours. But the reality is, every time I play with one of those things, it's expanding my context on what's possible. It's what's enabling me to get to a point where when a problem I haven't encountered before comes up, I'm not always starting from a place of, oh crap, what do? I've never encountered this before. It's a trigger to, wait a minute, we were doing, that reminds me of this thing that John was telling me about, like that app that's on my phone, and maybe this can happen. It expands the context of what's possible that I can connect to real world problems. And that's the spirit in which I encourage you to look at technology, not only in L&D, but in your life in general. So with that, I want to remind you that everything I talked about today, all the resources I mentioned, they'll be at this URL, as well as my slides, which are just basically pictures and useless outside of the context of this talk. But they're there if you thought they were pretty.
That's what I'm here for, man.
Sorry?
We got this all digital.
Oh, perfect. So you got it all there. So you can get all of that there. If you want to reach out to me, I obviously like conversations like this. This is different ways that you can connect with me. I'm happy to continue these discussions at any point, at any time. And I want to thank you for inviting me to chat with you today. If you have any other questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks for your look, David.
Oh, my pleasure.
That was awesome. April 19th, was that the next date? 16th, thank you. I'm an old guy, I don't have to remember things anymore. Please fill out your evaluations before you leave. Michelle will not let you leave without doing so.
Any more business cards on Apple?
Yeah.
For the meeting.
Let's keep winning. Tuesdays. Doing your thing.